and welcome to Lard TV, where we are here continuing our series where we're looking at the various army lists that can be used within Strength and Honour. Today, Mark is going to tell us about the slave revolt and the forces of Spartacus in that third Servile War.
Okay, welcome along again. In today's episode, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at a slave revolt army from around the time of the third Servile War. This is the army made famous by the escaped slave leader Spartacus. Now, of course, we all want to be Spartacus, so we can shout out the immortal line, "I'm Spartacus."
No, I'm Spartacus.
Shut up, Clarky. Sorry, you can't get the staff these days. And what we've got here is we've got an army from around 71 BC. This is at the end of the time period of the Third Servile War, in which Spartacus has raised up a huge, great big army made up of loads of slaves, and they've gathered them from all over Italy at this point here in time. So, what have we got here? Well, this is the army that's represented at Salaris River, the culmination of the campaign against Spartacus, in which Pompey and Crassus brought Spartacus' army to heel. It's one of the scenarios in the book, so I just wanted to model what the army looked like. The main part of the army here is made up of 3 units of trained slaves. These would be people who maybe had some military experience. They've been trained in some way to form into pretty organised lines. They've probably got Roman equipment there from all the captured armies that they've defeated. So they've got big scutum shields, helmets, probably mail shirts and gladiators, for some of the troops at least anyway. And you can see that they've been slightly more organised than the other troops there. The best troops inside the army, the cream of the armies, made up of the ex-gladiators. Now, of course, there were only about 200 gladiators who actually escaped from Capua in 73 BC. By this stage of the campaign, I suspect many of them were dead. But it represents the idea that we've got some of the veteran troops inside the army, the ones who are ex-soldiers, deserters, and experienced prisoners of war mixed in with the gladiators. So these are really the best troops inside the slave revolt army. We've organised them here into a model using small cohorts in a similar manner to the way in which the Roman armies formed. Of course, we don't really exactly know what tactical formations these soldiers would have fought inside, but I think the idea of putting them in cohorts makes them distinguishable from the other troops in the forces. There's no reason, of course, why you couldn't, though, just have them formed into lines, or even as bigger mobs if you prefer to. So whichever figures you've got and whichever way you want to represent, that's absolutely fine in the rules. It makes no difference in terms of the way in which they look on the bases. On top of that then, we've also got some German and Gallic slaves. Most of Spartacus' force wasn't made up of German and Gallic slaves, but a lot of them broke away earlier on with Crixus inside the campaign and they were slaughtered. So we've got a few of those represented here, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 of them. On top of that then, we've also got these big mobs here. You might recognise these as also being used as the Gauls in ancient Britons and other videos, and they're exactly the same figures here. So we've got a big basis here of untrained troops. These are going to be women, children, older slaves, and slaves who maybe don't have any military experience. They're armed with all kinds of agricultural tools and farming tools and a few weapons mixed in there with them. So they're inside big mobs. There's a lot of them and they're fairly enthusiastic when they charge, but after a little while you'll find they've got no real discipline and they quickly fall back and rout if they're put under too much pressure. So we're going to try and keep those a little bit further back in the lines. To accompany the army, we've also got a large number of skirmishers inside it here. These are going to be really useful for grabbing bits of rough ground on the flanks and also for forming skirmish lines here, which could support the main part of the army. On the left wing, we've also got lots and lots of cavalry. The slaves would have captured lots of horses inside their campaigns, and we can imagine that a few of them there are able to ride. You can fight with them as lighter slave cavalry too, but by the time of Salaris River, we've represented them here with cavalry elements. Finally then, we've got a base. In this case here, we've used a fortified base, which is very similar to the Roman ones. I'd have thought that the slave revolt armies by this point would be pretty well organised and tried to model their camps around Roman models. Spartacus himself was meant to be a Thracian auxiliary soldier at one point or other, and therefore probably knew how to build camps there. Alternatively, of course, though, you could use something like the wagon lager that we saw inside the last video, or possibly just a load of tents if you wanted something a little bit more chaotic. So this is an example of what a typical slave revolt army might be at the end of the Third Servile War. But of course, at the start of the Third Servile War, it probably would have looked a lot smaller. If you just wanted a basic starter force, you could probably reduce this force in half taking away some of the trained slaves and some of the skirmishers. And if you wanted a basic start-up army, you could maybe start with just a few gladiators, some untrained slaves, a few skirmishers and a single unit cavalry. And something like that there would be a great force to have at the start of the campaign maybe, and that may maybe represent 25,000 slaves instead of the 45 to 50,000 that we've probably got represented at Solaris River. So hopefully that gives you an idea, and it also gives you an idea about how you might be able to swap over some of the units, and by a simple swap over of a name tag in 2 mil, you're not going to be worried about the individual shield colours or uniforms and costumes of the different warriors. They can represent all kinds of different things. We're really now just focusing on the formations. So, Pompey and Crassus, are you ready for Spartacus?